So there was a lot of concern. There was a lot of fear still going on at that point. So there was a lot of concern about just people's livelihoods and being able to support oneself and one's family. So yeah, it was a tumultuous time. There was concern that the politics would boil over, I think, a lot of the time, and that people would be so angry at what was going on that there could be, people credit Roosevelt with providing a certain amount of stability. And as they said, as historians will sometimes say, Roosevelt, people didn't always like his policies, but they liked him. And so you see this division where you see the Supreme Court saying, no, we're not going to give you everything we want, or the Congress saying the CCC was slated to become a permanent part of government, and Congress saying, Mr. President, you can't have everything you want. We'll fund it year by year until we see what's going to happen to it, or the WPA, you can't always have everything you want. And I don't know that that was slated to become permanent, but Mr. President, I know you want to support these things, but Congress, we're going to put the brakes on you a little bit. But at the same time, so people didn't always like the policies, but they liked the man. I think there was a lot of, generally, a sense that Franklin Roosevelt himself, was a strong enough leader to pull people through some of the fear and some of the anger and some of the rioting and some of the other things that was going on with programs that were cut. The WPA began in 1935, and it was defunded it ended in 1942, and I believe its funding ran out in 1943. So it lasted into World War II, when the need for these programs was not as great anymore. There was a lot of, in fact, it wasn't as great at all. And a lot of the programs that had been sort of signature New Deal programs, ended. The CCC ended, the NYA, the National Youth NYA ended, and the WPA all ended during that time because there wasn't the need for them anymore. But the WPA was the granddaddy of them all. It employed 8.5 million people between 1935 and 1942. It constructed 650,000 miles of roads across the country. It did 125,000, the WPA workers built 125,000 public buildings, and you see them around with the little Art Deco shapes. You see a county building or a township building or a city hall in a little town or something like this. Great buildings. Schools. I gave a talk once and a woman raised her hand and said, I went to a WPA-built school. That was my grade school here in Minneapolis. So they're all over. I mean, the mark of people is there. 75,000 bridges nationally, 8,000 parks they worked in, including a lot of Minnesota's state parks, and 800 airports. So there was a real variety of types of work, a lot of roads, a lot of sidewalks in towns, work on infrastructure basically for communities was the work that the WPA did. I've looked at books where there's been, there's some books with photographs of the work that was done in Minnesota, the WPA, and they really focus a lot on the buildings. I mean, there's just page after page after page of the buildings that, that were built, which is great because that's something that's so visible and it's something that's so tied with the WPA. But the golf courses are an interesting part of WPA history, and I expect it's little known. And I think it's fascinating. But the fact that they were able to take this and look at it maybe as a community improvement project, the way you look at a street or a sidewalk or a building, and say our community, we're progressive. We help, we work with our citizens, we provide people recreational opportunities, we're keeping up, this is one thing we can do, we can build ourselves a golf course and make it available to people, and they did, and they did across the state. They're not known for their golf courses, are they? But I would think that they were providing work for people, and they had workers, and they needed work. I was surprised to learn that they did airports, too, to be honest with you, anything like that. This was something that served the community. There was an interest in recreation and in growth of recreation, and it was something that the communities could benefit from. And so they were looking at, why did they do parks? They were looking at ways that they could benefit. And I would think that it was a growing trend in the country. Golf was something that was becoming more and more popular. People were becoming interested in it. Towns wanted golf courses. They felt that this was a community improvement, and that the WPA was there to help. And so I suppose the projects were developed, and off they went. People were ashamed to be on what they called the dole, and that was relief. That was taking money for not working. That was just a handout. People really didn't like it. I mean, it was relief. You had to go to your neighbors and say, I can't make it. Maybe they're your neighbors across the street, or maybe maybe somebody you see in church or in whatever you're doing, and say, I can't make it, I've got to have help. That's a difficult thing to do, and then accept the help. And people were ashamed. People would end up on work farms, which we don't have anymore, because that was one way to provide work for people who were on the dole or who were on relief. And so there was that kind of thing going on. There was there was something to it. When we talk to in CCC enrollees, and I think it would be the same for the WPA, they were proud of the fact that they were working for their money. And that became something that was a factor. That's why when we talk about the programs, we say work relief, because they were working, and that was an important factor for these programs. People were being given work to do. And when they thought about it later, they were proud of the work they did. We should look around pretty carefully at what was at our communities, because I think I think people would be amazed at the amount of work or the impact that the WPA had on what our communities are like or what they look like.